he's a good guy. I like Jake.
Yeah, he's the best. I mean, he's one of my buddies from back
Yeah.
home. I think I've known him since 2014, maybe
Oh,
2013.
okay. Yeah.
So it's been fun having him around more.
Yeah. I'd say he's not turning up his nose at free food and
Right. Yeah. I can usually lure people
yeah,
in with
exactly.
like, oh no, no, don't worry about it. I'll cook.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, thanks a million for doing this again. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Um,
This is so exciting.
yeah, so the last time we spoke, um, was like peak beginning of COVID, when I guess everyone kind of thought like, oh, this will only last a little while and then it'll be fine. And we were, yeah, so I suppose like so much has changed since then. Like, so Matt won again, and retired. T
Yep.
and Shane moved to Nashville.
Yep.
Hard work pays off, kicked off and into a new gear. Podium started hitting the shelves. You
Oh
guys
yeah.
moved to Vermont. So
Hmm.
like as years go, I suppose it's probably the most changed packed year.
It was a busy year. Yeah. I mean, we definitely didn't sleep on 2020, and we haven't stopped in 2021. And I mean, it's crazy to think that we're basically through the year. Um, I mean, a year is always a year, right? It's 12 months. We know exactly how many days and weeks, but for whatever reason, this one just flew by. And I feel like you always say that, right? But I really do feel like this one flew by.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just because last year was, the last year of Matt competing, and the year itself was just extended. And so that year just felt like a really long year for so many reasons. But from our perspective, it was like, you kind of have the understanding of how the season goes, and then it usually wraps up around August. And then August came, and it was like, no, 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 we're going to do this in September. And then, no, 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 we're going to do this in October. And so I think last year just felt super long, that this year it's just like, oh, that. And we have so many other things going on that when we were sitting at the games this year, we are like, wait, I feel like we just did this. So yeah, it was very, and I'm sure many people felt that way too, especially those that were actually competing at the games this year. Like, wait, weren't we just here?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny how this year has really just flown by, and yeah, lots of change.
You mentioned the games there, so you had Vakey in the States for the games, and he's
Yeah,
been on the show before. I was curious, like,
what a
yeah,
legend.
he's a cool guy. How was it starting off? Like, so obviously there's a big transitional period there from like, Matt competing and that being, I guess, largely like almost year round the sole focus of everything. And then
Yeah.
when that's gone and you start building like a YouTube and focusing on a brand rather than performance, I suppose, like does that bring like new stresses, or is that for you, is that more like, oh shit, I'm in my comfort zone now because like I've done like work with Loud and Live and Reebok and I know about
Yeah.
activation, I know about brands, like was this more like kind of your niche?
Yes, for sure. And that's a great way of putting it. Like I did marketing work when I worked at Reebok. I worked with athletes for, team group, which then became Loud and Live. And so this type of work is definitely like, I'm used to this. The adjustment was for sure mostly felt on Matt's side, in terms of like, you know, when he was competing, the whole role that myself, O'Keefe, and kind of the team played was like, okay, let's take as much off of his plate as possible so that way he can just wake up, eat, go to the gym, train, compete, all of that. So now we're like, hey, buddy, you got some emails to respond to, or hey, you got to sit on this Zoom call, or whatever it is. And he's like, wait a minute, what is happening? But he's handled it with grace. So it's exciting to see him, like he worked with the Buttery Bros and that team and got Podium up and running, and anything when it comes to HWPO training, he writes the program, he meets with the members on a monthly basis and answers all their questions and records videos, so that way every session has a coaching, a daily coaching video from Matt saying, okay, here's our warm up for the day, here's the workout, you really want to focus on XYZ. So he's definitely put himself into the business side of things. But it's just different. He used to say, like, I don't run out of time during the day, I run out of energy. And that was kind of how he, like, okay, the day is done because I physically cannot go on
Yeah.
anymore. Whereas now, we're working until 9, 10 o'clock at night. Like we're learning how to set some boundaries, and just because the sun is up or you're not sleeping doesn't mean that you just work through, just trying to regulate, because the energy is still there. And it's the time that we lose. So yeah, I think definitely a new adjustment for sure.
I spoke to Keith recently, and he said that this was the first year that he actually watched the games. Like the first year that he was actually like, oh look, there's Catherine competing, and I get to actually see it. And then I suppose for you, like, was this the first time that you've enjoyed being in Madison, like from start to finish?
Definitely not the first time. I mean, I've enjoyed every year, and it was different in the sense that I missed watching Matt compete. O'Keefe and I were kind of chatting before the games happened of like, I started seeing on social media, like everyone's at, check-in, and everyone's, working out at the gyms that we're used to being at. And I was feeling this like, we should be there. I'm usually there at this point. We're getting all settled in, and we showed up on Wednesday, like on the first day of competition. So that was weird. And I definitely miss it. It's hard to not miss watching, one, your person, and two, somebody who was really freaking good at it, be out there. So that was different. But I definitely enjoyed getting to experience it with him, because I have so many great memories of being in the stands and watching and cheering. And, those days for him were very stressful, whereas they were stressful for me, but I still enjoyed it. And so it was cool to watch him enjoy it, or to see him get wrapped up in, like the head to head crossing the finish line. So that was a unique experience. One of the first events that we were actually on site for was a 500-meter sprint?
Oh yeah,
I think that's
the
what it was,
cleans, yeah.
500 or 550. Yeah, I forget what it was, but they were doing it few at a time, and you hear Kiki on the mic, and she's like, "Stand by," and Matt goes, and I'm like, "Hey, buddy, whoa, calm
He's
down.
gonna like
You're
rip a chair
not
out from in front of him, right?
Exactly. He just got this like, whew, I'm just, I'm used to like my adrenaline's pumping at this point. So that was really funny to just sit there and be like, you're not competing. It's okay. You don't have to go and run, or, just to like see some of that in him. Because typically when he was competing, I didn't really even see him. I'd see him at the beginning of the day. I'd pack his meals and I'd send him off, and then I'd see him at the end of the day. And it was pretty much, like, I was never like, "Did you have a good day, honey?" It was kind of just like, "Hey, guess who I saw today?" And, tried to distract him from whatever was going on. And if he wanted to talk about it and tell me about how a particular event went, good, bad, whatever, then we'd chat. But, for the most part, that stuff was saved until after the game. So it was fun this year to just like, as soon as an event finished, whoa, man, did you see so-and-so? That was crazy. Get to like really live it all.
And then I suppose like you kind of alluded to it there about how it's more time that gets in the way now. But I suppose like on paper, your days should have more time in them, because like, I suppose I'm assuming with all the new things on the go that Matt's probably busier than he ever was, like while he was competing, as in he's more like draws on his time, I suppose. But like an average weekday for you on paper must have more free time as a result, because he's busier. Like that you must have more free time to explore your own things that you want to do, rather than being like, oh shit, it's lunchtime, I better get going.
Yeah. Well, we thought that's how it was going to play out. I've personally inserted myself into helping grow HWPO training specifically. I mean, that's as much as even last year I had, feeding the Frasers was my full-time thing, and I was able to, write this cookbook and really dedicate a lot of time to it. Once Matt decided that he was going to retire, it was kind of like, okay, we now have this opportunity to build this business. And, the way that I was able to be involved in his career was just through food. I essentially was just like, yes, I handled a lot of day-to-day stuff for him that was needed, household things, whatever. I did that stuff, but that was just like helping your person get through their day. The food was for sure where I put most of my energy, just to be able to support him. But now, we're building a business, and I have I have talents and I have, experience in certain things that why not use them? There are definitely days where I'm like, man, I wish I could just be cooking all day long. And it's, phone calls and meetings but that's all, this is our family business. It's exciting to get to be more of an active part in it versus just a supporting role. And so, yeah, I mean, Matt retiring, hey, listen, he's for sure eating far less. And so the demands in the kitchen are less, but I have personal goals for feeding the Frasers. I, definitely have continued to grow the Instagram page and actually build out like a respectable blog and, put efforts into building that side of things, building a shop. I would love another opportunity to write another cookbook. And now I have a better understanding as to what goes into all of that. So I definitely have goals for that business. But really at the end of the day, our family business is HWPO and seeing that through its full potential. So any way that I can be involved there, I surely try to help.
With HWPO and all that's come with it, I suppose, I mean, I'm thinking in the last few months alone, you've had Justin and Adam down, you've had Keith has been there regularly, I saw Steve Fawcett there recently, you've had like Jake is knocking around a good bit, like you've obviously had more opportunity than a regular season, I guess, to kind of get more people together regularly and like I guess a lot of what I see anyway is them sharing food and showing like anytime there's anything happening anywhere, there's always a plate being put down somewhere. So
There's always
I'm assuming that it's
for sure.
the in season and around that kind of stuff is more enjoyable culinary wise. Would that be fair?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the nice thing is I can't say that we didn't have house guests when Matt was competing. It was just a little
Yeah.
different. It was definitely certain times of the year that made sense, and or we were always grateful when people were able to come to us versus Matt having to travel when he was in season. But yeah, now it's amazing to have the property that we have, the home gym that we have, and really the ability to bring people to us and host them appropriately, whether it's an athlete or business partners, however, or employees, whatever it may be. It's just nice to have that space, and I can't help but host. It's the best. It's what I love to do. I really enjoy cooking for people, bringing people together, and so yeah, I'm always grateful for like, oh, cool, we have 13 people in town this weekend. I'm gonna cook.
Feeding the Frasers then is it's been on the go for a while and growing and building like a base and community, I suppose, over time. And then I suppose there's a common interest around food, and like you just mentioned there about like getting people together and like having an excuse to cook when people are together, I suppose. But like when you took that first picture of like your slippers and the food on the plate, did you think like, okay, almost 500,000 followers, like, you mentioned the clothing, the pottery, the homeware stuff, and now a cookbook, like was that in your head, or were you just thinking like, oh, this place looks good, I'll take a picture of it?
Gosh, not at all. There are some days where I'm like, I'm such an imposter. I can't believe like people remake recipes that I share, and it's just one of those things that I was saying to somebody the other day, I'm like, oh, it's just a hobby, and Matt's like, I don't think you can say that anymore. I don't think it's a hobby anymore. I think it's kind of your job. And I was like, oh, right. Yeah, no, I totally do this. This is like, I earn a living and I work for this and all of that stuff. And yeah, I had no idea. And I mean, I want to say I've said this from the start. So if I didn't say this the first time I was on this podcast, then I'm shocked. But like, I would be doing it even if nobody was following. And that's how it started. It just was meant to be a food photo journal. So that way I could aid in my learning how to cook. That the whole reason why I started feeding with the Frasers is, yes, it was kitschy and there's fun little. I'm obviously feeding Matt Fraser, and people were interested in that at the start, and that felt cool. But really, the goal of it wasn't to show what I was cooking for Matt. I mean, it's people probably come to our page and they're like, wait, this is the diet for an athlete? This is not a diet that we recommend for most people, right? Like, is a very particular person that can eat like this and perform it the way that he did. So I'm grateful to have, someone with a stomach, an appetite, a metabolism, the taste buds, all of that stuff to cook for. But really the goal of it was to learn how to cook and to be more consistent in the food that I cooked, and really just provided me a place to learn and a creative outlet. So I've always enjoyed cooking. And back when I used to work, very typical 9 to 5, I coached at a couple gyms also. I mean, I worked a ton. And so cooking was, I had to cook. I was meal prepping. I'm very familiar with the batch cooking on a Sunday, and then, hoping you can get through the week with what you've got in the fridge. And it was just like an outlet for me at the end of a really long work day to just come home and cook some dinner. And so I've always enjoyed the process. It just came down to when I started dating Matt and cooking for him, and really like loved to show, I guess, affection and how I care for people through food, that, I would make something and he'd be like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm like, oh gosh, I don't even remember what I did, like, oh, I'm so glad he likes it, but I don't know that I could recreate that. The one thing that I loved about cooking was that you could stand at your stove and just go, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, oh, I have this, I'm going to substitute that. You can be super creative with it. And that's what's exciting. But also in terms of wanting to recreate that food experience, that's where I felt like, okay, I've really got to start writing stuff down. And that's why I would, the last photo of those series back in the day was always my notebook. Yeah. I wrote everything down in the notebook and I took a picture of it, and then I took a picture of the process. And that was intentional, just so that way when I went back and looked at my page, I could see the finished result and then the steps along the way. And that was kind of how I learned how to cook, was just through that. And then it was, just a little bit of a creative outlet to share it out on social media and in the format that I did. And I definitely did not start it with this goal of it being a business or really doing anything with it other than just collecting some photos and some recipes and learning how to cook some cool stuff along the way. So it's really awesome that people are showing up and recreating the recipes. And, now I get this opportunity to learn a new skill in terms of photography, or I get the opportunity to write a cookbook. I mean, that is just super cool. I'm still like, I think it will become even more real once it's in people's kitchens, and I start to see some of that, people recreating all of the recipes and stuff, because it's something that I've worked really hard on. And I'm still like, man, remember that time I wrote this book? And I'm just excited to touch it and flip the pages and all that stuff. So yeah.
You mentioned a couple of times, so I have a copy of it, and you mentioned a couple of times.
You do.
I made something from it today, actually. I'll talk about that later on, but I have, so a couple of times in the book, in your, in like the foreword or the introduction or whatever, and then in the afterword, which I never heard of before, but it makes sense if there's a foreword, there's an afterword. But a couple of times you mentioned how like your cooking was self-taught, and like that it's from a place of curiosity rather than like, your great grandmother passing down and so on, like that. I suppose most chefs or most people that have cookbooks, that's kind of the thread that's in them, is like, well, I remember making apple tart with my grandmother or blah blah blah. So like yours, from what you're saying, is like, first of all, out of necessity, and then out of like wanting Matt to enjoy what the excessive amount of calories he was having to take in, I guess.
Yeah.
So like, I was curious with some of the skills that are self-taught, like, okay, you can like mess up a bit of chicken and be like, oh, that's too dry, I need to like stop it sooner next time or whatever. But like, say the recipe I did today, like some of the steps and instructions that were in it, like, I don't know, like say drying the chicken before you put like seasoning on it, or like even simple things like say how much butter is too much, how much is not enough. Because like I've had food before where you're like, oh shit, this is oily as fuck, and then I've had it before where it's like, well, this is incredibly dry. And I understand that a lot of that comes from like trial and error, but like those little things of, like I mentioned, drying the chicken, like is that from like, do you watch other people, do you read other cookbooks, or is this purely from like, I made it once without doing that and it didn't taste right, so I tried doing it because I know you do it with like say ribs or whatever?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of both. I mean, there's a ton of trial and error. I think about how much I've been fortunate to cook. I mean, people talk about all the time when you're trying to learn something, like the best way, for me anyways, the best way to learn is by doing, and things just become second nature. You know, there'll be times where I'll talk about a recipe or a process to somebody who that is just so foreign to, and you say, oh, you just pat the chicken dry and that keeps it nice and crispy or whatever, and they're like, oh, you just do that. You know, like, you forget that what seems very simple to you, because it's now become something of second nature, it's just, you know, what you do.
It's that like curse of knowledge, basically, where you know it because you know it and you don't understand that other people don't know it.
Right. And so I've always tried to be of the mindset of like, okay, it's not just this. Like, there is a reason why you do it, and you know, you gotta educate people, because then it becomes a just for them too. You know, something very simple, yeah, can be not a simple concept for everybody because it's just not second nature to them. And yeah, I mean, I think a little bit of it is trial and error. I've been fortunate to cook a lot over the last couple years, so there are certain things that just become second nature. And then pretty much the way that I've learned, you know, you can YouTube just about anything these days. And so YouTube University has been helpful. I read a ton, food blogs or recipes. You know, I just found that if I wasn't in the kitchen cooking, I could still be learning. And so, you know, one of the things that we've been so fortunate is that we've traveled everywhere. So we've been able to taste food from all over. But in those times, if I'm traveling and I'm staying in a hotel for 2 weeks, I'm not cooking for the most part. So, you know, doing what we can, I've looked at that as like, oh man, it's such a bummer. I'm out of the kitchen, and, you know, it feels as though progression stops. But then what I realized is like, oh, well, I bring, you know, a novel with me on the road to read on the airplane. Why don't I just bring a cookbook? And so I'd started just like traveling with cookbooks or flagging food blogs. So that way, you know, a night that you're just hanging out in the hotel, and maybe you ordered room service, or maybe we went out to dinner, and instead of just sitting and watching TV at the end of the night, it would be like, oh, I'm just going to like read these recipes. And you start to pick up on themes or techniques and things like that. Flavors are huge. If you know how to mix flavors together or be creative with flavors, then, you know, you can take chicken and do it 7 different ways by just changing a couple different spices. So that's been super cool to learn and just figure out that, okay, there's a ton that can be done in the kitchen via trial and error, but then there's so much other work that you could be doing if it's something that, you know, excites you. And I just feel like everybody's curious about something, and if you just find that little niche that you're curious about, it's pretty easy to just like dive into it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I made oh god, I can't remember the name of it now. But it's chicken with like blue cheese and prosciutto ham on it.
Apples
Yeah.
and prosciutto. Yes.
So that page of the cookbook is currently like unreadable because it was funny. So I put in, I don't have a skillet, so there's a skillet for the recipe. So I just like use the pan and then put it into like a tin dish or whatever in the oven.
Like a baking pan. Perfect.
Yeah. So my daughter is like, so she'll be 2 in a couple of weeks. Well, she will be 2 by the time this comes out. But yeah, she is picky, like funny when it comes to food. She fucking loved this. So like she won't, if she eats food that has something green in it. So she used to love like broccoli when she was really small, and then she just got adverse to it, I don't know. But she'll like pick out, she'll be like, Dada, no. And she'll like pick out the green bit and like drop it on the ground.
All the little green pieces.
Yeah. And the same with onion. If there's onion or mushroom in something, the whole plate gets thrown onto the ground. But yeah, she was like, the first thing that was gone off the plate was the onions. And I up until now with her, I've been like cutting the onion as small as humanly possible, so it's almost like invisible. But I think obviously what I've been doing is just because I don't think I've ever cooked onion for 7 to 10 minutes before. So I think obviously what I was doing is just like drastically undercooking onions. So she was like, what is this like
I have dragon breath.
Yeah, what is this
day.
acidic like chew that I have in my mouth? So yeah, that was good. But yeah, I picked her up like the chicken was on the pan, and I was showing it to her, and we were standing like, I'd say about like, 3 feet away or whatever, and it spit, and so that page is just now like see-through with the grease or whatever.
You know what though? So yes, because you have the advanced copy then, so it's like the
Yeah,
newspaper
yeah, yeah,
paper.
exactly, yeah.
The full cookbook will have a little bit
Yeah.
hardier of a stock and
But
will
that's
be
that's
full
what makes
color
a
and
good
all of that
cookbook
stuff. So we'll
though.
make sure we get you a good one, but also that's what is so great
Yeah,
about
splashes
cookbooks is
and
like you've got stains on the pages or you write little notes
yeah,
and yeah, I love just like there's something about a physical book
yeah.
that is just so special.
Yeah, it was, and I was a like, I don't want to oversell my cooking of it, but it was a very nice dish. Like, I think everyone enjoyed it.
Well, that's
The
awesome.
cover of the book, so like we mentioned, the kind of the inner section is kind of like just unfinished. It's like almost finished, but not quite finished, like the inside bit. But the cover is beautiful. So there's like lovely colors on it. There's nice personal touch at the bottom with the two of you guys on it. How hard is it, like, to set on a design of, like, because it's essentially like a child, like it's, like you work endlessly on it, and like I spoke to someone else today and we were talking about he's bringing out a shoe, and I was talking to him about it. He was like, oh, like, you like it and it's good, but then you're freaking out about what other people think. And I was like, it's basically like your child, where you think they're the cutest and the best ever, and then you bring them out into public and you're like, oh fuck, what does everyone else think of them?
Right, yeah. Are the manners
Yeah, yeah.
okay?
Do other people
Is she
think she's
thanking
funny,
you?
or
Thank you.
are we both
Right,
just
yeah.
weird?
Right, yeah, perfect. Yeah, that is a real thing. I I don't know that anybody who does like I've been listening to a lot about this on in terms of like people who do creative work. I mean, there's like your podcast, for instance. Like this is something that you've been working on for years. You put it out there. You hope people like the episodes. And I'm sure if you were to go back and listen to your first episode, you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, what was I thinking?" The format, or the questions that I answered, whatever. And I think that that's something super cool about the work that we do is that I could have spent a whole other year perfecting this book. I feel like I learned so much in just the making of this that now I almost feel like I just want it to come out already because I feel like I've already improved so much just from everything I learned from doing it. So I'm like, I feel like it's outdated and like you do feel so weirdly insecure. I'm very excited but also very nervous about it. Just feels so different than I mean, I've been sharing recipes and photos and stuff on Instagram for years. And never do I have that same like when I go to post a recipe on my blog or on Instagram, but for whatever reason it is print, it is final, it is, you can always go back and edit a blog post or you can always update an Instagram post. You can't once it's out there. It's out there. And yeah, I mean it's definitely a little nerve-wracking, but also I look at it as well, if this was the only thing that I was ever going to do, then maybe I would feel a little bit differently. I just look at this as like this is the
Yeah.
first. So of course I'm going to look at it and think like, oh, I could have done this a little differently or this a little bit better, but that's a whole learning process. And that's, you do a recipe once and you're like, it's good, don't get me wrong, but I could have done this and this, and next time I'll do that. So I remember feeling a little sense of panic when it was like, okay, I have to hand it over and I don't know if it's like, is it really good or do I just like it because I've worked so hard on it, And Matt was like, listen, guess what? You can always do another one. And then you can take all of the learnings that you experienced on this one and apply it to the next one and think about how much better that next one is going to be. And he was like, you can't be too afraid to share it because then what was the point of all of that work? And you kind of have to like, you got to put it out there. I was recently listening to, it was like a Brene Brown podcast, and she was saying, she's like, I've never published a perfect book. Like that just doesn't exist because you could always go back and always tweak something or edit something. And then at that point, like think about how many books are left unpublished because people were too afraid to publish something that wasn't perfect. And so, part of that I was like, oh, okay, that's how I feel. I feel a little like nervous to share this. You know, it's very, I totally get it with your kid, right? You're like, I think she's hysterical, but also like, is anybody else resonating with this, or is that just me? And so, yeah, it's like I'm very proud of what I've created and what I've put out there, and I hope that it's received well, and I hope that people enjoy cooking these recipes and they enjoy bringing their friends and family together to share a meal. And if they don't, you know, that's okay. I'm really proud of it, and I'm super excited about what it is, and I'm excited to take all of the learnings and do it again. So you know, it's like having a second kid, right? You get another
Yeah, you
chance.
messed up the first one. You just go.
Right, exactly.
She's a dud. We'll just have a second one.
Right.
this
We'll try
this
again.
this one
That's
will go to
fine.
college.
Right.
Um, so you mentioned there that like I actually like I think what you're saying there is relative to a lot of things, and you know like I think it's the same. I imagine it with like say coaching a class or anything creative at all, like drawing, writing, painting, anything of like if you can actually stand over something and say that is absolutely perfect, I think you fucked up somewhere. Like I think that there's something
Yeah.
wrong. I think obviously you don't want to be like overly critical where you mentioned you get to the point where you don't publish it or you don't share it or whatever. But you need to
Right.
be at a point where you're like, yeah, okay, that's the best that I could have done in these circumstances. And then
At this
yeah,
time,
like for
yeah.
next time
Right.
now, you know, like in another 3 months, you might, as you mentioned, I might look back on, never mind the first episode, I might look back on my last episode and be like, well, that was stupid. I'm not going to do that again or whatever. And you might look back at like one of your recipes and say, oh, I should have worded that differently or I should have whatever. But like, it's the benefit of hindsight, I guess, improves the next thing.
Right.
Um, the process then of writing a cookbook. So I know a lot of your recipes, you mentioned that you've built up like kind of a stock over the years and you've kind of tweaked things and perfect
Mhm.
things over time. But like, do you, so like when you make a recipe, uh, do you like record what you're doing as you like, do you write everything down that you're doing as you do it? Or do you make something, think it's nice, and then think, shit, what did I do there? Like, how did I do this the
Right.
last
I should have
time?
written that down.
Um, and
Yeah.
then eventually get to a point where you're like, okay, now I know it's a teaspoon and a half of nutmeg or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
because I suppose like with I've been like you mentioned at the start where you kind of just throw in this and you throw in that or whatever. I've done that like I especially with like barbecuing where you're like, oh screw it, a bit of Worcestershire sauce or whatever, and you're just kind of throwing in stuff
Right.
and it happens to taste nice, and then you're like the next time you go to do it you're like, oh, I think there was cumin in it. You know, how far out do you start thinking, okay, this is probably going to be something I'll use, I need to start writing down what I'm doing here?
Yeah. So I would say the cookbook is definitely different than like what I do for the blog and for Instagram. Just currently at this time, I mean, Instagram and the blog is definitely a little bit more free flowing in the sense that it really truly is just what we're currently eating. There are times where I'm like, oh, I really want to learn how to make this. And so I set time aside in the week to research some recipes, test out a few things, and then learn it so that I can recreate it and tweak it and make it my own and all of that stuff. And so that is a little bit more free flowing. Whereas for the book, I sat down and I think the first 3 or 4 months I was just writing. So I really spent a lot of time on the recipe development side, and something, this is going to sound so silly, but up until then, like I didn't even know how to properly write a recipe in the sense that I know how to bring flavors together, and you know, you can understand, okay, if I want to achieve perfectly roasted veggies, I'm at the skill set now where I know, okay, if I put all these sweet potatoes on one sheet tray and they're super crowded on the tray, they're just going to steam. They're not going to roast. So now I'm at the skill set where I understand little things like that where, okay, if I'm making this roasted sweet potato recipe and I want to achieve crispy skins on the potatoes, then I'm going to have to take these 4 pounds of potatoes and separate them onto two sheet trays. And then, you know, if I wanted to add something like apples on, well, the apples cook faster than the sweet potatoes, so I'm going to add those later. Like I'm kind of already thinking about some of these things, so I have an understanding of how it works. But I spent a lot of time just sitting and thinking, like, what are the types of recipes that I want? And I would start with like writing down a list of ingredients. And so before, when I was creating recipes for Instagram and the blog, they would just kind of be all over the place. I didn't know that when you write a recipe, the ingredients should be listed in the order in which you use them.
Oh, fuck, I never knew that.
So simple, right? Isn't it one of those things you learn it and you're like, duh.
Oh my God, that's so, how we are both so stupid. That is so obvious.
So it's like, here I am, 3 years into this food blogging, and I'm like, oh yeah, if I'm gonna make this, like, I don't know, steak and cheese, it's like, well, of course I'm gonna list the steak and the cheese first because it's in the title. And now it's like, okay, but what do you do first? You actually, like, say all of our ingredients are prepped for a steak and cheese. You put butter or oil in the pan, you caramelize the onions, then you put in peppers, then maybe you take that out and you cook the steak, and then you toast your buns, and then you add the cheese. And so it's like the steak and the cheese are really at the bottom of the ingredient list because that's just where they are in the process of the recipe. So it's like I learned some fun stuff along the way. And
God, that's a real, like, I was today years old.
Right. I was like only a year old last year when I learned that. I mean, this is not, surprisingly enough, that's something that I'm like, I cannot believe I've been doing this for years and just didn't know something super simple. So I did a lot of work on upfront of like learning that stuff because, like I said, it just felt so different than posting a picture on Instagram and being like, yeah, look at this cool thing I made. And I wanted to, that was all part of it. I want to learn how to cook. I want to learn how to photograph. I want to learn, how to properly develop a recipe. And so I spent a long time just writing it, and I would write out the list of ingredients, and then I would kind of think through like, okay, very similar to the steak and cheese. All right, so we got to melt the butter or the oil, get that nice and hot, and then it's probably like low to medium heat to cook the veggies down for, I don't know, like 7 to 10 minutes. And so I'd kind of like write down thoughts of how I thought the process would go. And when I had that rough outline, I would then go and test it. And so you kind of write out your thoughts, write out how you think it's going to go, and then you go through the steps and you're like, okay, yes, this makes sense, or I want to salt before, no, I want to salt after. And you kind of just make notes of it that way. So I would like write these outlines, have it on a printed piece of paper, and then go through the steps and make notes on the page of like, that didn't work out, or needed to go longer, less time, whatever it was. So that way when I went back to actually write out the full list of ingredients and steps, I had like a pretty good thought process and then a really good application of it.
Yeah, that's it's going to take me a long time to settle after that bombshell. I just think of how many things I've like baked or cooked and wasted so much time being like, butter, where's the butter? And it's like step one, it's going to be the first or second thing. So yeah, that's crazy.
And not to say that that's not necessarily the golden rule. You could potentially be looking at somebody who's writing recipes that just didn't know that little snippet of information, because I'd put recipes out for years without knowing that. And so I'm sure my old recipes are all scrambled, but the ones in the book, unless I've missed something, which is very possible, they should be in the order in which you use them. So
that's cool. I'm impressed with, you were mentioning there about like the sweet potatoes and when the apple goes in and that kind of stuff. I am impressed with the, like, pardon the pun, but the plate spinning that goes on, where when I was making that, the chicken today, my wife was in feeding our other child, and she was like, I was standing in the doorway, I was like, oh, probably about like 15 minutes now, I'd say, I'm just waiting for it to get to the right temperature or whatever. She goes, oh cool, what are we having with the chicken? And I was like, potatoes. I hadn't fucking done anything, so I was just like, oh, potatoes, yeah, it's all under control, don't worry about it. And I was like frantically going out being like, how do I cook potatoes in 15 minutes? I am impressed with that.
That's definitely a learned skill in terms of when you're preparing a full meal, is just kind of like the timing of everything.
That's how you make, that's the whole trick with a roast, is like timing things. Like, it's just timing basically. At what point then, so obviously you mentioned that you have the Instagram, you mentioned that you have the the food blog and that was your creative outlet, I guess. Like, at what point was a cookbook? Was it something that you felt would have been like remiss in not doing, or was it something that, like, were you approached as like you should do a cookbook and we'll help you do it, or did you think like, well, I've done this and a cookbook is the next logical step, or at what point did it become a realistic thing, that a realistic idea that was on the table, I guess?
So I'm very fortunate in the sense that I think where I am now in my comfort and my skills and my confidence and all of that stuff, I feel today like, oh, I could totally write a cookbook. Like, I got it. 2 years ago, I was very gratefully approached by a publisher, and they said, hey, we would love to have you write a cookbook. And at the time, I remember being like, thanks, but are you sure? I just, for whatever reason, I was just, and like I said, I mean, even recently, I'm like, oh yeah, cooking is just my hobby. And Matt's like, no, it's not. It's like, oh, right. It's just kind of this like identity thing that for so long you identify that, okay, this is something that I just enjoy doing in my free time. This is just a fun hobby. And it's hard to make that switch of identifying as like, no, this is my passion. This is my career. This is something that I take pride in and that I'm good at. Like, it's just, I don't know. I'm not the type of person that's like, I'm a really good cook. I mean, I do think that I am, and I hope that people enjoy the food that I make, but also I'm not going to be the one being like, you guys should really have this meal because I made it and it's really good, or you should really cook this recipe because I wrote it. Like, that's just not, it's just not me. So I don't know, thinking about writing a cookbook, that's kind of how I felt of like, who am I to write a cookbook? And so, yeah, I'm very fortunate. These were publishers that I worked with when I was working with athletes and had a really good relationship with them. And they were like, we would love for you to write a cookbook. And I was just like, okay, I'll do it. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. And then I think there was probably a couple times throughout where I would go back to like, what am I doing? I don't even know how to write a recipe. Like, as I'm learning these things, I'm like, I'm way out of my league here. And then you kind of just settle in of like, okay, this is something that, I'm really excited to take on this challenge. I'm really excited to learn and see how I grow in this. And yeah, it definitely was not something that I was like, okay, I've achieved, X amount of followers and now it's time to write a cookbook. I really had no idea where I wanted the business to go. Now I have a little bit better of an idea. There's certain things that I would like to be doing, and just trying to match those up with the appropriate timelines and providing, I guess like space in order to complete those things and achieve those goals while we have other things going on. So, yeah, I mean, it was not, and now I'm just so grateful that somebody was basically like shoving me into this and saying like, okay, you have 40,000 words, go. And I was like, whew, okay, where do we start? Well, let's start with word feeding the Frasers. That's 3 words. Great. We're in a good spot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you take all the photos for the book yourself, apart from the one of you and Matt, obviously?
Yes.
That's incredibly impressive. I'd argue that's probably pretty rare as well, where someone does everything. So congratulations on that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. I learned a lot about photography through that as well. So, man, this whole thing is just like, roller coaster of learning. And I mean, if that's why I started feeding the Frasers to begin with, I really got like the most bang for my buck in writing this book.
Yeah. So I guess you've used your tool belt that you've built up. Yeah. So no, it's very impressive. You guys moved back to Vermont, and I remember one of the things when I think Matt did a video where he kind of did a walkthrough of the house and the gym and stuff, and I remember, I'm sure other people were the same, but I remember thinking like, okay, well, the kitchen's going to be ridiculously epic, because I mean, you're not going to have like, it's not as if you were going to be like getting a house and you were going to go, I don't mind really, it was always going to be like a chef's kitchen, like a cook's kitchen. So I'm assuming designing that was something that you took like pretty seriously. And I was curious how, so you mentioned like writing a book and then using your mistakes or any like, you know, minor failings that you think might have made to improve on the second one or the third one or whatever. Like, it's kind of harder to do that with a kitchen. So when you actually had it in actuality, were you like, this is exactly what I wanted it to be? Or are you like everyone else where you're like, oh, I should have put that cupboard over the other side? Or
Yeah. Funny enough, I mean, like, we have a beautiful kitchen, but it's not, it's still pretty, it's modest in the sense that, like, I didn't go over the top with our range. I didn't, you know, I picked very nice appliances that I really like the brand. I like, you know, the functionality. I've used them before and just kind of knew, like, yeah, these are, you know, the thing that I was the most stickler about was the dishwasher. I'm like, I just want a really good dishwasher. I'm happy to pay for a dishwasher if I know it's going to work. And so that was really the only thing that I was like, I need this dishwasher.
do you rinse your dishes before you put them in the dishwasher?
I do sometimes. It depends on what's on the plate,
Yeah.
to be honest.
I only do it rice. Rice
If it's
rice
like,
gets stuck in, you know, the little spinner thing, it gets stuck in that. So that's the
yeah.
only, but like my,
I mean, we clear the plates. Like, I'm not putting
yeah.
it in the dishwasher with like food on it, but I'm not like rinsing it clean
Yeah, my
and then putting it
in-laws
in the
rinse them clean,
dishwasher.
and I'm like, it's a fucking dishwasher. It's not a dish dryer. Like, it doesn't need to be clean going in.
It could be generational, and it also could just be like currently at this Airbnb, the dishwasher is just, it's an older
Yeah,
dishwasher.
it's a piece of shit. You can say it's
And
a piece of
so,
shit.
yeah, it sucks. I'm just very spoiled with my dishwasher. And so, yeah, I went and like opened up the dishwasher yesterday and I was like, cool, I gotta hand wash all of these now because the dishwasher didn't do its job. So currently, the dishwasher here is just being used as a drying rack. I'm like, I'll just wash them and dry them in there. Um, I would do, the one thing that I would change is I would do two dishwashers
Okay.
because just with at the rate of like
Yeah,
whether
when
it's
you're
when we're
testing
hosting.
recipes and stuff, your kitchen must just be so annoying. Because even I find if I cook something that uses more than one pan, it's like, oh, for God's sake, you have to clean it. And then
Yeah.
even serving, then you need other stuff like other dishes and appendages and stuff. So it
Yeah.
must just be a
And then
nightmare.
when you go to photograph everything, you've got like even more because now, you know, it's different than just like putting the food on your plate and eating it. You know, you've got to like kind of like make a little bit of a mess to make it
Mm.
look pretty, or you got to use extra bowls with all the side stuff that normally would just go on your plate. And you got to dress it up a certain way. So yeah, it's more when I'm testing and then specifically when I'm photographing food, it's just like, how are there so many dishes? Like, I don't understand. You know, it was peanut butter and jelly. It's like, where did all this come from? But yeah, I mean, I would do two dishwashers, but the only, you know, like we kept things pretty simple. Like our space is super simple, and the island, the non-negotiables were like we have a small back wall where like there's cabinets in our fridge, and it was like, do we put the sink back there or do we put the stove back there and the sink in the island? Because we couldn't have both of those features on that wall. It's just too small. And I really didn't like the idea of a cooktop in a seating area. But I also didn't really I know what my dish area often looks like. And so so I was like, well, I don't want either of them in the island. And then I was like, okay, I have to put something in the island. And we compromised on the stove because one of the things that I would like to be doing with feeding the Frasers in the new year is doing more like actual cooking videos and something either for our YouTube or for like a private subscription group or something like that where we're actually doing some cooking together. And so it was like, well, this makes so much sense where we can have the camera across on the island. And then, you know, rather than me cooking a dish from back here and being like, so guys, you really want to get a good sear on the chicken? It's like, doesn't make sense. So I'm really happy that we thought through some of that stuff, even though that's not currently something that we're doing. And, you know, we're not in the practice of it. It was like we had the forethought to say like, okay, let's make sure we set certain things up. And what that meant was that we just made our island bigger because I was concerned about the space between someone sitting there and then, you know, hot flames or splattering chicken, whatever it may be. And so we just made made the island a massive island, and I love it.
Might be misremembering. Have you got one of those like Belfast sinks? The big like trough kind of. They're really cool. I really like those.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Yeah, I looked at a couple different ones, and the one that I picked was just the biggest option they had, and I pretty much just wanted to be able to put all of my dishes, and like the basically the scale was, I was like, could we fit a 3-year-old in there at some point? Great, that's the one that we want then, because that was kind of the, you know,
yeah.
once again, we don't have kids yet, but we know that we're going to someday. So, the forethought to say, can we bathe children in that sink?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's the one.
That's fair.
Best.
So you've answered my next question. I was going to ask during the Loud and Live event during COVID last year. You did a cook along in the middle of it, which I think everyone in Ireland will remember because you were proclaiming how good Kerrygold butter is and that that's what you should be using. So I was going to ask, is that something that we can see more of? But I'm assuming, going by what you're saying, that at some point that will become part of the plan.
Yeah, I would definitely. I really enjoy it. I'm, not afraid of the camera. I think that there's like, I've got a little bit of charisma. I enjoy cooking, and that would just be something super fun to share. It's really just it has come down to what we talked about at the beginning of like, whoa, where did this year go? All of a sudden it's just like over. And, we have a lot of big plans and things that we want to do with all of the things that we've got our hands in. And so it has just become like a priority thing of like, oh man, okay, yes, I still want to do that, but we just got to get through a few more things and then we can kind of circle back. So it's definitely on my radar, and something that, once we've got a full-time photographer, videographer, someone that we can rely on being around and helping create a lot of the projects that we have on the horizon. It's like, that will just be so simple to just add into the lineup because, hey, for lunch today, this is what I'm making, so why don't we just get the camera out and then I'll show everybody what I'm doing, is kind of, I think, how it'll go.
That's cool. So 2022 then, we've got the book early on in the year. We've got the hard work pays off for continuing the rollout, and the pro coaching has launched, and Podium are presumably continuing their growth. Like, is there new things on the horizon, or is everything focusing around, say, those 3 items growing and evolving?
Yeah, I mean, all of that still feels very new. It feels like we've just scratched the surface of everything that each of those things can be and will be. We've got a ton of plans on how to grow and evolve and build a larger team to help service and be able to do more. I think that at this point, it's simply just a bandwidth thing. We have so much that we want to bring to both HWPO training and Podium, and I don't even have a hand in that at all, other than I scoop it daily. I enjoy drinking it, and I'm like, hey, you guys are doing a great job. This is super cool to see now that there's product and stuff. But I know that those guys have a ton of plans in terms of new flavors and activating with athletes and stuff. So we're just I feel like everything is still so new. We have so much that we want to do with everything that I don't know that we've thought of anything else to do just yet. I think we are pretty much of the mindset of, let's do fewer things really well versus doing as much as we can and maybe falling short.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you probably have enough, I think, to be fair as well. It's not like you're sitting on your hands. Like, you've got enough going on.
I think we're doing okay.
Yeah. I was curious then, so like, when this comes out, the festive season will be over. So you will have had Thanksgiving, which I know is a big deal in the States, and then Christmas, which is a big deal. Like, when you're someone like you, does that come with, like, are you, like, say, from September being like, oh, shit, like, all eyes are going to be on me now of what will I do? Because if I put that good of a plate out on a random Saturday when Justin and Adam are in town, what am I going to do on, like, the Thursday of Thanksgiving? Or what am I going to do on Christmas Eve?
Yeah.
Like, is there a lot of self-imposed kind of pressure on that?
You know what? There isn't. It's funny. I made one thing for Thanksgiving this year. like just the way that my family has kind of always divvied up. You know, my brother does the turkey, my sister-in-law does the carrots and the green beans, I do the stuffing. You know, my other siblings will bring snacks or like whatever it is. We've always just kind of divvied it up. And I think maybe someday I know that I would love to host my family for Thanksgiving or Christmas and things like that. And I think if I were hosting, I would probably take on more. But also, I kind of like it in the sense that oftentimes when I am hosting, it means that I'm not participating.
Yeah, you're kind of in and out, like,
And I don't, yeah, and I don't mind it. I think that there's something special about being the curator of an experience and of a good time and watching, you know, the nice thing is the way that our house is set up where I'm in the kitchen and I'm still in the conversation. So I'm very fortunate to have that where unless I'm grilling outside, I'm not really missing out on anything. I still get to participate. And I also get this really awesome point of view where I get to watch everyone, you know, sitting around the table and having laughs or sharing stories or whatever it is. So I also think that if I were to be hosting Thanksgiving, let's say, maybe I would do a little extra, but I like the fact that we all share responsibilities in that. And then that way, not one person is just left, you know, with all of the dirty work. And as much as I love to do the cooking, there are times where I'm like, oh, it would just be really nice if I could like go hang out with the people that I don't get to see as often, and things like that. So yeah, we have, you know, we've done great at like divvying up the workload for big holidays. And then there are plenty of chances and plenty of times where I'm like, nope, I've got it all. Y'all just come over and just eat. And so, yeah, I think that there's a good balance there. You know, when there's big holidays, happy to share. And then when there's like an event or something, I love to just take it so that way everybody else can just enjoy.
Yeah, I think like my mother-in-law is an amazing cook. Like she makes, you know, in her own words, I think she makes everything with love. I think that's the way she puts it. Like, but yeah, I empathize with what you're saying there because a lot of the time, like say on Christmas Day, you'll see her for like 40 minutes because she's off, like, you know, and she just missed out on so much. So yeah, I think that the divvying out is important. I don't know if she has the confidence in other people to divvy out to us, but you know, maybe she get another family someday that she can trust.
Yeah. I have no ego when it comes to that. You know, I'm just kind of like, everybody's where they're at. Yeah. You know, I have some friends that are like, oh, are you sure you want me to bring this over? Like, it's not going to be as good. And I'm like, it's going to be great. Yeah. Because it's one less thing that I have to do, and it's also like you are like, don't take on anything that you don't feel ready for. You know, I don't need you to make the roast if you don't want to. Why don't you just bring a salad?
Yeah.
You know,
why don't you just set the table? Why don't you just put the napkins out?
Bring a soda? Exactly. Yeah. Everybody can play.
Why don't you just go have a seat? Just go see what's on TV. It's fine. I got it.
You take out the trash. How about that?
And stay out there. I'll call you when it's ready. Look, we'll finish with a quick fire. So breakfast, sweet or savory?
Ooh, breakfast savory.
Echo bike or ski erg?
Echo bike.
Clean or snatch?
Snatch.
Brownies or pie?
Brownies.
Run or row?
Row.
Gymnastics or cardio?
Cardio.
And pancakes or waffles?
Whoa, waffles.
Okay. I try to make a little mix of like fitness and food there.
I love it.
So thanks again for coming on. Congratulations on the book. It is beautiful. It's great.
Thank you so much.
I am astonished with just the level of skill that you've accrued over the years. Of just to be able to do everything yourself is remarkable. I think it deserves high praise. And from having, say, selling a t-shirt and seeing someone wearing a t-shirt and the excitement it gives me, I can only imagine how you're going to feel when you see it on a shelf in a shop, and more specifically covered in smudges and bits of crumbs and stuff in someone's kitchen. I think it'll be remarkable, and it's all well deserved. So best of luck with everything.
So cool. Thank you so much. Oh man, this was awesome. I really appreciate the time, and always a great conversation. And yeah, thank you so much. That makes me so happy that you made a recipe. Thank you.
One so far. There'll be more coming. But yeah, no, it was great, and it was easy to follow, which I guess is the whole point. And it'll be even easier to follow now that I know that there's a logic to ingredients on the side.
You're right. You just follow those ingredients; they'll lead you through. Yeah.